Morty, you gotta tell the people about our show.
Aw, gee, Rick, there's a lot of kids out there watching. I'm not so sure it's appropriate.
Morty, relax. These are special kids. They watch YouTube videos. They're really mature, super intelligent, way smarter than you, Morty.
They are?
What? Oh, yeah, sure. Wubba-lubba-dub-dub, it's 2016. On with the review.
Hey guys, PIEGUYRULZ here, and Adult Swim has made a lot of cartoons over the years. Most of them are very obscure, but well loved by a certain audience. Very few transcend that bubble and make it into the mainstream. But if there is one adult cartoon being talked about more than any other these days, it's Rick and Morty. Heck, it's one of the few popular adult cartoons that hasn't been running for over a decade, with respects to BoJack, Archer, and Bob's Burgers, of course. Rick and Morty is a show that premiered in late 2012 by the guy who voices many screeching, stuttering, and beloved cartoon characters, Justin Roiland, and the guy who made the best sitcom of all time, Dan Harmon. The show is about a hyper-intelligent and alcoholic grandfather named Rick, who takes his stuttering, neurotic grandson Morty on many high-concept sci-fi adventures throughout space and alternate universes. Also, it's about watching an obnoxious couple bicker constantly, but more on that later. So why is it this show is held in such a high regard by many people in such a short time? To put it simply, it's different. Both Roiland and Harmon love improv comedy and dislike the typical system by which most shows are made, and it very much shows in Rick and Morty. From the fact that the characters stutter and have other mannerisms you don't see too often on TV but do in real life, to how they've done 2 episodes thus far that are based around showcasing many different bizarre audio improv sketches. Interestingly enough, I both love and get irritated with the show for how improvisational it is. The spontaneous feel of the show works well for the comedy and all of the little bits that they do, but it can lead to some episodes' stories feeling half-baked. So let's start with the comedy. As I mentioned, the humor in the show is particularly strong. There are many components of some episodes that I'm not crazy about in regards to characters and story, more on that later, but every episode is still very funny. There is always at least one joke in every single one that just kills me and has me on the floor in tears. And most episodes keep me chuckling throughout. The show is really good at clever wordplay. Additionally, it employs shock humor, but unlike other shows that do this, Rick and Morty is good with the timing and making sure there isn't too much shock humor. But above all other kinds, this show loves meta humor. There are many references to story writing terminology like the stakes being high and call to adventure, and a lot of the humor comes from a deconstruction of tropes and actions commonly associated with sci-fi and TV shows in general. Along with this, there are many jokes made about how ridiculous and weird some of the elements on the show are. Like in Me Seeks and Destroy, when Rick is in an alien bar and is offered weird-sounding drinks, he points out that they sound like nonsense words. Oh, and speaking of, the show features plenty of random, seemingly made up on the spot nonsense words. These meta jokes about stories and tropes are bound to be a big hit with anyone who loves television and has studied it in any capacity. Of course, not every single joke can be funny, and some jokes that relate to things that I'm about to talk about later that I don't like about the show obviously don't work for me, but in general, the show is really consistently funny, which certainly helps keep me entertained when some of the stories are lacking. And speaking of, some episodes will have stories that just kind of go nowhere, like the season 1 finale that spends way too much time on the wackiness for my liking, especially considering the episode tries to get deep at the end. Same thing with the Swifty episode. These writers have some very good concepts, but in some cases it feels like the execution of these stories could use a bit of cleanup. I'm not just saying this though, it's been well documented that Harmon is a very talented guy, but that sometimes he needs a bit of a push to take his good ideas and refine them into a full story. Looking at Community's first 3 seasons, you have a show that was a great marriage between a creative genius and an experienced network, compared to when Yahoo gave him full control and the episodes weren't nearly as good or tight. Unfortunately, I have one more complaint about the stories. There are a few episodes, especially in season 1, that go for concepts that are overdone, or just straight up bland parodies of movies. Things like the Go Inside the Human Body episode. Kidneyland really ought to sue on that one. And the Inception/Nightmare on Elm Street parody. Luckily, they seem to shake these stories for the most part after early season 1, but we still get the Purge parody late in season 2, so they aren't completely gone. Now, I don't strongly hate these episodes, but they come off as bland, at least in terms of story. Making jokes about Inception got old years before that episode came out, and South Park did the exact same Freddy/Inception connection. Thankfully though, This is only the case with a few Rick and Morty episodes, and the stories that are good, most of them, are really phenomenal. One of my favorite things about the show is its unique take on science fiction concepts. There are episodes about characters getting desynced in time, making it split into alternate timelines, Rick dating a hive mind, parasites that fool you into thinking they're friends by use of false memory flashbacks, a council made up of millions of alternate versions of Rick, and many other stories. Some of these have science fiction ideas that I've never seen before, while others have an interesting twist on a classic concept. Special shout out to one episode in particular that looks like a very typical TV show plot, then totally turns the cliche of just undoing the problem on its head in a very Cronenbergian way. I don't want to spoil it, but trust me, you'll know it when you see it. I want to make it clear that even though I have a problem with some of the stories, the majority of them are really just that good. Now on to the characters. I love the characters of Morty and Rick, but Beth and Jerry really get on my nerves. So let's start with Rick. His confidence, intelligence, and his ability to not give a crap while also being an emotionally damaged alcoholic makes him so much fun to watch. He's right up there with characters like Dr. Cox from Scrubs and Gregory House. He gets to speak his mind and not worry about the consequences, or care about them at any rate. On top of that, the dude can build some impressive inventions like the portal gun. Also, his speech pattern consists of repetition and burping, which sounds like it would be annoying, but it actually gives his speech a really unique and catchy flow. The character also has an energy to him. He gets psyched up to go on adventures, likes to play video games, and party. He's also complex in that, though he is fun-loving on the outside, he clearly has demons he's hiding on the inside. I'd hate to know someone like Rick in real life, but man does he make for a great character. Then there's Morty. He has a lot more of a heart than Rick and often tries to do the right thing despite Rick's indifference. He has anxiety issues, though some of that may just be an appropriate reaction to the craziness around him. The show repeatedly tells you he's very stupid, but personally, I don't buy it. He's not a genius, but he's had his clever moments, and he's nothing like the other stupid cartoon characters on TV. He's kind of like Timmy Turner's brand of stupidity. Plus, Rick has a very interesting reason for keeping Morty's self-esteem low, so maybe there is something to it, but that's just my personal theory. Morty grounds Rick, and his ability to care and be responsible really balances out the duo. Meanwhile, Rick puts Morty into some crazy situations that just freak Morty out and tests his character. They make a great pair of adventurers and create a wonderful dynamic to play off of each other, and this is one of the greatest assets of the show. I love the really interesting adventures they go on, but more than that, I really love watching the two of them bounce off each other. Seeing Morty freak out at something while Rick nonchalantly tries to calm him down while making it worse is a routine that never gets old. When you get down to it, the two are polar opposites, and that's why they work so well. And it's interesting to watch Morty become a little bit more like Rick and Rick more like Morty over the course of their adventures. Much like the comedy, their interactions are always on point, even in the episodes that I'm not super fond of. And if Rick and Morty's dynamic is my favorite thing about the show, my absolute least favorite thing about it is Beth and Jerry's dynamic and storylines. So Jerry is, stop me if you've heard this one before, a father who gets no respect from anyone, isn't very bright, gets nagged by his wife, and is a total loser. I mean, at least he isn't fat? But yeah, Jerry is the same old character we've seen on television in dozens of shows. And surprisingly for this show, there is no interesting twist with him. He is just a pathetic loser like so many dad characters before him. He's the show's Meg, or more appropriately, Cyril Figgis, and everyone likes to take pot shots at him, even when he's right. Oh, yeah, that's the thing. Jerry is actually right about some things, like Rick being a horrible influence on Morty, but because he's the designated loser character, he is automatically seen as wrong by both the characters and the show itself a few times. He isn't very interesting and pretty much exists to be the butt of jokes and get nagged at. Though admittedly, some of those jokes are actually funny, they aren't funny enough to make up for all the usual problems that come with having this type of butt monkey character, like the humor about him getting repetitive and how annoying he can be with how pathetic he is. Beth, on the other hand, is a jerky, egotistical mother who hates her husband. She got pregnant young and resents her kids and husband for it. She is very happy to have Rick back in her life as an adult and is protective of him way beyond the point of common sense. Also, she's insecure about being a horse doctor. Outside of that, she doesn't really get much of a personality. Maybe eventually they'll develop her character, but right now most of her screen time is devoted to her arguing with Jerry. Now on their own, they both sound like kind of bland characters, and as much as I'm not crazy about them, they would be at the very least bearable if not for one thing. Beth and Jerry do not stop fighting. A third of the subplots on this show involve the two fighting or considering getting a divorce before deciding their relationship is okay, only for them to go back to fighting 2 episodes later. There's only so many times the show can try to pull the, well, maybe their relationship just might be okay card before the audience just stops buying it. Even Rick constantly mocks how predictable and dull it is. I just honestly don't get why the writers keep going back to this. I mean, sure, it might be somewhat realistic in that there are couples out there who constantly bicker but stay together for the kids or because they're just too lazy to find new partners, but just because it's realistic doesn't mean it makes for good TV. And it's not like this sort of thing never works. Me Seeks and Destroy has a fantastic B-plot that features the two of them considering breaking up, but it's awesome because it has a science fiction element there, and the ending is actually sweet, especially because that episode happens pretty early on in the series. The first interdimensional cable episode could have been a sweet ending to their arc, but then they go back to fighting again. Heck, in general, this isn't even so bad in season 1, but man does it get old in season 2. Oh, and the last main character is Summer, Morty's sister. She's okay. Sometimes she tags along with Rick and Morty and can add an interesting twist to their dynamic, but a lot of the time she just comes off as a token teenage girl. I don't really mind her, but personally I prefer when it's just Rick and Morty. The artwork and animation on the show are really top-notch. Like most things here, the designs for the other planets and creatures are very creative and unique. The show also has some really nice visual touches like Rick's drool and the scribbly eyes. You see these things and you know you're watching Rick and Morty. Not really much else I can say aside from the fact that it just all looks really good. Definitely the best visually looking show Adult Swim has ever put out. And I would certainly put it up there with one of my favorite art styles in terms of creativity and how detailed a lot of things are. The tone of this show is actually really interesting. At a cursory glance, you would write it off as a simple comedy, but especially in season 2, things get pretty dark. Because of the high fantasy setting, they could get away with having a lot of weird and funny gags while still allowing you to take it seriously. The show was once referred to as The Simpsons meets Futurama, and that's a pretty apt comparison, though personally I'd say the closest Rick and Morty is to anything else would be both Futurama and Adventure Time. The show's tone is really set by Rick himself. He uses adventures as an escapism from his issues. So he is fun on the outside and loves to goof off and make jokes, but the darker sides of him that he tries to swallow always resurface. And the tone reflects that with a bunch of goofy, weird, fun stuff, and then something really dark popping up at times. But at the same time, the show never loses its sense of fun or adventure. So it's a really great balance with the show being 4 parts comedy, 1 part drama. I think they've hit on a very nice ratio there, and I hope that the show doesn't get too serious or too silly, and when the show is goofy, wacky, weird, nonsense words like 80% of the time, that 20% when it gets serious really hits you like a punch to the gut and is just all the more effective for it. Also, like I mentioned earlier, there is that whole improv aspect to the show. If you pay attention, you'll notice the characters very often talk about the actions they are doing, almost like writers pitching a character's actions to each other. So much so that you could probably watch the episodes with your eyes closed and get the gist. And that's another hallmark of this show. All in all, Rick and Morty is a show bursting with creativity. The designs, concepts, character quirks, and stories are usually unlike most of the stuff you'll see on TV. In general, the show does things differently, and I love it for that. Especially in a time when most adult animation either follows the same formula as The Simpsons, or decides to go really out there and really weird. In fact, Rick and Morty is a nice marriage between the two. At the same time, though, the things that it doesn't do differently, like Jerry's character and the pop culture spoofs, feel very played out. Like the show is too good and too intelligently written for that sort of low-hanging fruit. In many ways, it's totally unlike anything else, but in some ways, it's exactly like other adult animated shows. But of course, the good things greatly outweigh the bad here. And if you're into adult animation at all, this is a must-see, especially with its short 10 to 11 episode seasons. It's not perfect, but what it gets right, it gets really right. That said, because the show does have experimental aspects, there are certain stylistic things like the constant burping that some people might be bothered by. Personally, I enjoy these quirks, but if they annoy you, the series probably isn't for you. It's currently available on Hulu Plus, and some episodes are up on Adult Swim's website. The pilot is a pretty good representation of the show as a whole, so check it out. PIEGUYRULZ, out.